Fostering connection through vulnerability, the People Pleaser podcast validates struggles, celebrates growth, and inspires positive change. Together, let's embrace authenticity, challenge patterns, and evolve with compassion. Hello. It is Corie here, your host. Thank you for tuning in to the People Pleaser podcast. How's everybody doing? I am just getting over a bit of a gnarly cold, so I actually have been wanting to record this episode for a few days, but I had to wait for my voice to kind of come back and for like the phlegm to just kind of chill, because it was a whole mess, a mess of things going on over here. So I think I'm back on track. I did take 2 days off work, which I highly recommend. As a fellow people pleaser, I highly recommend taking advantage of your paid sick days. Take what is owed to you, especially when you need it, especially when you're sick. I was very tempted. So here's my people pleasing of the week. I was very tempted to just take the 1 day off. And the first day I took off, which was Monday, I had a fever the night before. So it was very, very easy for me to be like, I had a fever last night. I'm really not feeling well today. And that kind of was an easy reason to give to my boss. Day 2, the fever was gone, and I was actually feeling so much better, but I just knew I was not 100%. And I also work very intimately with a vulnerable population. So I just needed another day. And by taking those 2 days off, yesterday I went back to work and I'm like, oh, this is how you're actually supposed to feel when you go back to work after being sick. You're supposed to be better, because I know for me, I've spent years and years just taking that 1 day off and then kind of being sick, a little bit sick for a long time. So I'm sure this is relatable. I know this is something I see a lot online where, we're all just we really have a hard time with those conversations with our boss. And the reality is that I have never once been challenged on it. I think the only time that I was feeling a bit challenged is when I needed to get a doctor's note, and that just poses just layers of annoyingness. But I've never been challenged on are you actually sick? Do you actually need this sick day? So I was very proud of myself and just very grateful that I could take the 2 days off and actually go back to work feeling good. I would say that I've been rubbing up against some other people pleasing this week, and it really does come down to this podcast and just the external pressures that do or can exist if you are looking for them. And even when you're not, because they are everywhere. But I definitely fell into some negative thinking, some comparison traps, the classic imposter syndrome, where I started to get pretty caught up in my own head around why do I think I'm so important? Why do I think anyone should listen to my podcast? And this came up as I was promoting it and, putting it out there more and focused on building my audience and my following. And those things are important, but there came this really nasty kind of inner narrative of why is your ego so inflated, Corie? Why do you think that, your voice needs to be heard above others? And obviously that's not the goal. I'm not trying to say that I'm the only podcast you should be listening to, or that I'm the most important voice on the topic of people pleasing. And there's none of that. But these inner critics were telling me otherwise this week. So really had to get a handle on that and just do some of my own reflecting and just that self-care piece, that like coming back down to reality. And the reality is like this podcast is so important to me. I'm quickly realizing like just how in love with this process I am. And with that, like the deeper my love grows, the higher my expectations get. And I'm so excited to promote the podcast and get it into as many ears as possible. But then I started to think like, oh man, if I'm working so hard to promote it, I better do a damn good job of making sure it's something that I'm proud of and that people actually like and benefit from, which all tracks, like that is all true. But I did have to have a little bit of a stern conversation with myself, acknowledging that I know I love this podcast. I know I'm proud of it. And if I truly believe both of those things to be true, then the rest will flow and I don't need to like micromanage it. So that is kind of where I left off on that kind of whole mess of thoughts and feelings, is just like keep coming down to my reasons, my why, and it's about quality over quantity. If I have a handful of really loyal listeners who are actually getting something from this and looking forward to it and appreciating it and giving me feedback and doing the work and applying it to their own lives and doing their own self-reflections, that is a major win, hands down. So today's topic, the one that I want to explore, feels a little bit more on the educational side of things. And to be completely honest with you, I've had some hang-ups with this approach, like a more educational approach, because I really don't want to assume like any type of expert role. I want to find ways of still bringing in education, but not claiming to be an expert. So consider that the disclaimer for this episode. I'm not an expert, just someone who likes talking about things that are interesting and helpful. So today's topic is fawning. And I don't know if it's just the world I'm living in, but this word has been buzzing. But if it's a new one for you, I want to break it down. You have likely heard the trauma responses or the fear responses: fight, flight, and freeze. The idea is that when faced with danger, perceived or real, which I'm here to argue that perceived is real in our bodies, we will unconsciously go into either fight, which is usually just how it sounds, combative, resistant; flight, we take off, we get the F out; or freeze, which is essentially panic, disassociate, or just do nothing. There are many examples of how these responses can actually look in reality. Sometimes they're not as like grandiose as they sound. So just know that there's a full context that I'm not going into each one. Fawning, however, has been coined as please and appease response, which can look like being agreeable or helpful. Sound familiar? People pleasing. In the wake of a threat or danger. So if you're listening to this podcast, the People Pleaser podcast, there's a good chance that this response kind of sounds familiar. You may be like, yeah, maybe that's me. So I'm here to unpack it a little bit more through some of my own experiences and examples. Fawning shows up for me when I feel threatened. It's as though my biggest defense, the most powerful tool in my toolkit, is to make people feel good about themselves. I remember being new to working in a coffee shop, and it was a town that I just moved into, and I walked into the role with confidence. Some might call it overconfidence. But the reality is that I felt very secure in the job. I had experience, I knew what I was doing, and I was excited about it. This confidence rubbed a certain coworker of mine poorly. She was of the mindset, or so it seemed, that one needs to earn their confidence, and I just hadn't paid my dues yet. This woman was relatively hostile and dismissive to me, really playing up that mean girl role. But she was well respected by the owner of the coffee shop, and it seemed that she had some kind of sway because she was like one of the only employees who worked both front of house and in the kitchen. And in that industry, for whatever reason, that like is cool. And it is cool. I felt so gutted knowing that I'd gotten off on the wrong foot with her. And I knew that it had to do with my level of confidence or the way I was showing up as the new girl. Instead of brushing it off and just letting her deal with her own issues, I caught myself totally sucking up to her. I would go to her with all my questions, giving her the opportunity to teach me. I would make certain accommodations for her, do her favors around the cafe. Ultimately, I was just majorly kissing ass. And this is fawning. This woman did nothing to deserve my servitude. I was letting her off the hook with poor behavior, all because I was trying to win her approval and get into her good graces. Looking back on it, why would I even want to be on her good side? Clearly, this woman did not have my best interest at heart. She was not treating me well. I owed her nothing. But my fawn response is to ensure that everyone likes me at all times, and I will sacrifice my own integrity to win her over. Now, I don't totally know where I stand on this next story, but just stay with me. One thing that really frustrates me about myself is that I am a crier, to the point where I joke that like my first emotional response, no matter what the emotion is to cry. This characteristic lends really well to fawning. Okay, so this is embarrassing. There's levels of embarrassment to this. I've only had one speeding ticket. I don't know why I'm embarrassed by that. Am I trying to be like cool? Anyways, I've only ever had one speeding ticket. I'm a good girl. And when I got pulled over that one time, I was so overwhelmed with the entire situation that I started to cry. I was embarrassed by myself. I wasn't even trying to fawn. I was fully accepting the ticket, but I know that I was like, it probably looked like I was trying to play up my emotions to get a lesser penalty. And the cop had none of it and definitely fined me the full amount. But it's an interesting thought, like, why do I cry so much? It doesn't feel like it's something I have any control over, and it really does play into the fawning that I exhibit. But it leads me to wonder if this is an emotional response I developed as a way of getting my needs met. I mean, a crying baby, it's pretty obvious. But I still seem to exhibit these baby-like instincts well into my 30s. So I'm just, is this connected to fawning? The jury is still out on that one. Ultimately, my relationship with fawning has been experience after experience where I believe that I can use my charm, my kindness, my empathy to manipulate a situation to get my needs met. None of this is ever conscious. It truly feels like a protective factor that is embedded within years of experience. I can remember in high school, it was really important to me to be liked by everyone. And I mean, everyone. And in the days of gossip and shit talking, I remember a common scenario or, kind of a scenario that happened a few times where a friend would be like bitching to our friend group about someone being mean or being in some kind of altercation or disagreement. And my go-to line when listening to them would be to say, well, they're nice to me. And I remember it got to a point where my friend once mimicked me, well, they're nice to me, which made me realize like how often I was saying it and how annoying it sounded. It was as if I thought I was the exception and that I had won that particular individual over. Like, oh, I'm not experiencing that grief that you are because they're nice to me. It's so funny to think about because I was recently watching The Circle on Netflix. Shout out Circle watchers. And there was one contestant, Lauren, who got a lot of flack for being nice to everyone. And the feedback was that there was no way she could be authentic if she was being nice to everyone. The message I am taking away is that it's unrealistic to actually be friends with everyone, and that when you approach friendships and connections from a quantity perspective, the quality can suffer. It also makes me realize in this moment that if I'm using kindness and compassion in these fawning scenarios, people may begin to question my authenticity when I'm actually being kind and compassionate, which is not ideal. So obviously there are risks to fawning. One risk that I see is that these fawning behaviors drew me closer to potential threats of danger. Danger being a subjective word ranging from being disrespected, taken advantage of, the presence of codependency, feeling used, lots of context, lots of different scenarios. Fawning is not when you're trying to make friends with someone who you genuinely want to be friends with. It's when you're trying to be friends with someone to ensure they are not your enemy or a threat to your safety. And again, this isn't usually conscious. When I think about the relationships I've had with individuals who have struggled with addiction and their mental health, I logically understood the challenges that could present themselves. However, I wanted to believe that with the appropriate amount of nurturing and support, I could take those challenges away. And my motives were twofold. One was to show up as a supportive and helpful partner. That is true. That is who I am and who I want to be. And two, I was trying to take care of myself and take down any possible risks in the relationship. In approaching a relationship with these motives, I was actually causing more problems. And that lied in the fact that I was never fully honest with myself or my partner with these motivations. I do have a history of dating individuals who are either in a current state of addiction or on their journey to recovery. And the narrative that is louder than all others is the one telling me that I am going to fix them, that I'm going to see things in them that no one else has seen, that I will be stronger than the addiction. I know, this screams codependency. In these scenarios, my fawning shows up so early, and what it looks like is instantly accepting their addiction into our relationship, becoming their number one supporter, and downplaying the role of their addiction, pretending it isn't even there. Unfortunately, in most of these experiences, the fawning and associated behaviors has resulted in the abandonment of my own needs, the loss of our mutual safety, and eventually the end of the relationship. I'm not taking full responsibility, and there's clearly so much context that is missing as I explain this, but I do really want to highlight the damage and risks of long-term fawning. The truth is, addiction has a role in my family, and I have spent a lifetime learning to understand and accept it. As a result, I have formulated some very strong patterns around whom I'm attracted to and who in turn is attracted to me. This week, my therapist told me that my superpower is knowing addicts, and I honestly wanted to cry. Well, I did cry because I knew she was right. I have been around addiction enough in my life to have an unconscious feeling of comfort with it, to the point where when I was on the dating apps, like how old am I? But when I was on the apps, it was almost like comical how many people I was meeting to later learn that they were currently in their addiction or had previously struggled with their addiction. So I need to know this about myself and proceed with the appropriate boundaries and personal awareness. It's not to say that addicts are bad or that I cannot be in a relationship with them, but I need to be honest with my motivations, and I need them to know me for me and not my fawning. One thing that I love and appreciate about my husband so much is that he is 12 years sober, actively seeking support, and is committed to his sobriety. But he has never once made me any promises. He has told me directly that he cannot promise me that he will never touch a drink or a drug again. He has no intentions of going back out, and things would have to be really out of alignment if he did, but he is not allowing me the opportunity to lose sight of the daily commitment he is making. Him being this forthright with me initially was really uncomfortable because I wanted to believe that there was no way he could relapse and that I could feel safe in his everlasting sobriety. He believes that as soon as you think you're untouchable, the universe has a way of humbling you. So it's an invitation to stay committed to honesty, communication, and accountability. I bring this in because it speaks to the honesty and communication I have in my marriage where it has not existed in previous relationships. It's as though previously both my former partners and I both agreed to just keep our heads in the sand. I do, however, feel as though I am getting better at noticing my fawning tendencies and not acting on them as if on autopilot. I was in a recent situation where I had set a boundary, and in doing so, I was left feeling a bit uneasy in the connection. I feared that the boundary wasn't well received and that it may have an impact on the relationship. I noticed that I was scrounging up ways to prove to this individual that the connection was still important to me and that my setting the boundary would not change the dynamic between us. However, this time I didn't actually act on the fawning. It was all occurring internally, and for the first time ever, I was aware of it. I could see the insecurity in myself, and I could see that I was trying to self-soothe. If I were to act on these insecurities and reach out in this way, my boundary would essentially be null and void. It would take the hard work I did in setting the boundaries that I knew were needed, poke holes all throughout the plan. I'm still building acceptance around the fact that boundaries do shift dynamics, and that change is not necessarily something to fear. My husband asked me when I was telling him about this episode idea, okay, so what's the ideal response if it's not fawning? And I told him I don't think it's that fawning or any of the other trauma responses are necessarily wrong, and that there may not be a binary way of looking at trauma responses. However, if it doesn't feel right and it leads you into harm's way time and time again, it may be an opportunity to find new ways of coping with the stressors in your life. In this last example, sticking to my boundaries and building my confidence in maintaining them was a better option than fawning. In my examples with addiction, it's a lot about being present and honest with any fears and discomforts that arise. A big part of it is confidence. And as a people pleaser, getting comfortable with the idea that not everyone is going to like me and I'm not going to like everyone, that's an expectation that needs to become normalized. So I hope this offered a good overview of fawning and that some of these examples were relatable or helped you understand some of your own behaviors and patterns. I brushed up against some insecurities recently with how open I am in some of the examples that I share. And I realized that it actually feels really purposeful and empowering to share in this way. I keep everyone's integrity, mine included, at the center of what I'm doing, and I'm trying to do this work in a good way every time. So thank you so much for being here. Talk to you soon. Once again, this is Corie with the People Pleaser Podcast. Thank you so much for your support, and if you did like what you heard, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can find daily content from me on both Instagram and TikTok. Both handles are at peoplepleaser.pod. That's at peoplepleaser, all one word, .pod. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next episode.